one of the key objectives to a marketing campaign is obviously having an objective to start with. And coming up next to show you just how to do that, we have what Molly calls in the back, the Oprah of real estate, Katie Lance from Katie Lance Consulting, and Cara Whitley from Century 21.
So this is a fun conversation, right?
Yeah.
First of all, utmost respect for both of these marketers. And first of all, props to you, Cara. You guys won the Innovator Award. It's a big deal for a legacy brand.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, a legacy brand at Inman to be winning an Innovator Award, right?
We are so excited about that, so thank you. And it is a big deal for us, especially being almost 50 years old, to win something like that here. We are over the moon excited. So.
Well, you should be. And props, I mean, so it actually perfectly sets the stage for this conversation, though, about objectives and knowing what your objectives are so that you can make the right decisions with your marketing. So when we spoke originally, Cara, because it sets it up, you went through the process, a very tedious process to get to your North Star. And talk through that.
Yeah, sure. And I would say back to the Innovator Award for just a minute, it was about the rebranding. But back to the process and going through that, it's not just about the rebranding. It's about the positioning and the strategy and really taking the time we spent more time on our positioning work than we did on the rebranding effort because it's all the work that comes after that. So the rebranding has been amazing, we think, and that sounds like others did, which is great. But it's the work that comes after that, before and after it. And the work that we spent really setting it up is making sure that we took that hard look in the mirror and we said what's going well and what's not going well.
Yep.
And what is it that we want to be in the world and what are we for and what are we against.
Yep.
And really aligning what our mission is and being really clear about that and really setting some really clear objectives. And then it made it really easy to figure out what to say yes and what to say no to and have that roadmap for the next 12 months and then 3 to 5 years out.
That's amazing. So how do you think about objectives? You're like, really?
To follow that? No.
Yeah,
No pressure. Well, obviously, this is the marketing track. You have to think about objectives. I see all the time agents and brokers signing up for things and paying money for things and running Facebook ads because they feel like they should be doing it, but they don't really have a sense of why, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I know it's a cliche, but I think it really does start with your why, and what it is that you really want to accomplish. Is it more traffic to your website? Is it more leads? Is it brand awareness? Is it all of the above?
Yeah.
And just, I think also, and I talked about this earlier in one of my sessions, this idea of leaning into who you are and who you're not.
Yes.
Right? Instead of trying to be all things to all people. And we see this a lot in marketing. I see this a lot with individual agents and even brokerages who they don't want to be polarizing. They don't want to offend anyone. So then they become really vanilla.
Yep.
Right? And so I think taking a step back and thinking about who you are, what's your voice, as we heard this morning in one of the keynotes, that is laying the groundwork for figuring out, well, what is that objective? And how do we get there?
Exactly.
That's something we talked a lot about, which was be okay with not trying to please everyone.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
know who you're for and who wants to be part of you and who doesn't. And I always tried to personalize that and say, think about a brand that you really care about.
Yeah.
Not everyone you know thinks the same way about that brand. And
Yeah.
that's okay. And that's probably why they're successful. I always hold Starbucks up as an example. I'm not sure why, because I'm not a coffee drinker.
Yeah.
But which is a little weird unto itself, I think. But
We won't hold it against you.
there's the Starbucks fans, and
Yeah.
then there's the ones who don't like Starbucks,
Yeah.
and that's probably why they're successful. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and
Exactly.
and being comfortable with being for some people, and some people being okay with finding a different brand or a person that makes sense for them.
Right.
That makes sense. And Katie, you mentioned some objectives that most agents have, but how do you even get to that point where you kind of know what you're doing? Is it just where your business is weak? Let's talk about even sort of getting to the point of defining your objectives.
I always think a great place to start is to look at where you're at. Whether you're brand new in the business. I would think, especially this audience is a pretty savvy audience, so I would imagine most of you have been in the business a long time. So it's always great, I think, to kind of do a little bit of a self-audit on yourself. That's something we do with all of our consulting clients. That's usually the first step. And the word audit is always a little bit of a scary word. I always say, we're going to pull back the good, the bad, and what we could do to improve. And
Yes.
I feel like that's always a great place to start because you figure out what's already working. Is it content? Is it social? social? Is it digital? What's working and then what's not working?
Yeah.
And that can really start to lay the groundwork, I think, for figuring out what those objectives are, what it is that you want to accomplish. And then I also think having a long-term thought, right? Because regardless of marketing objectives, you guys know it's not going to happen overnight. So
Yes, exactly.
understanding those things that you have to put into place are things that you're going to measure over a year, or 18 months, or 24 months, and be okay with that.
How about you? How did you guys get to your North Star? What was the process? What did that look like so that the folks sitting here can actually say, okay, what does that actually mean? How do I get to that point?
But yeah, it's a lot of what Katie just talked about, which is understanding your history, understanding who you are and where you came from,
Yeah.
and then being honest with yourself and being okay taking that hard look in the mirror and saying what is and isn't working.
Yeah.
And just kind of having that radical honesty is what I would frame it as, and
I like
get
that.
comfortable with that.
Do you have a process with the whiteboard or with the Post-it notes, or like what did that look like?
We did have a process. We worked with an outside firm called
Yep.
Eat Big Fish, which is a challenger mindset. So we worked with someone else who kind of helped push us into
Yes, yeah.
that uncomfortable zone.
Yeah.
So one thing we talked a lot about was getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And then I also think looking outside of your own industry for inspiration and other thoughts, because it's easy to get, you spend every single day in your own category. It's easy to get kind of mired in what you know and what you're doing every day. So there's a lot of things going on that parallel what we do. So getting some really great inspiration from others who are doing interesting things
Yeah,
that we may be able to steal.
Exactly. Well, that's a great point, right? Because now you have your objectives, right? Now, how do you know what to do to meet the objectives? What does that look like? What's that process? And is there a tool or a tip or a trick or an easy digestible quote or something like
A tweetable.
Yeah, a
Just
tweetable.
throw out there.
Yeah,
The magic pill.
yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of it is, just kind of what we're talking about here, this idea of figuring out who you are and who you're not.
Yeah.
And I've said this many times on stage before, this idea of, when you put yourself out there, you're attracting who you want to work with, right? And it's a difference between attracting people versus just chasing leads, which is exhausting, for any business. And I love what you said about, looking outside the industry. And I always like to think too, what is something that, inspires me personally? What is something that sort of resonates with me? And also from a social media perspective, I have to talk about social media, right?
100%, right?
I can't be on stage and not talk about it. But from a social media perspective, there's a lot of psychology around why do people share, right? And so just, I guess a quick takeaway for you here, it's one thing for someone to like you on Facebook. It's one thing, and a whole thing for someone to comment. But when you share, why do you share something? You share something because it's funny or it's inspirational or it tugs at your heartstrings. And so I think thinking through that when you think about your content, which should lead to your objectives, right?
That's it.
So especially with social, I think sometimes we tend to be so professional and so buttoned up that we look like an ad. We look like, we're trying to sell something versus have a conversation.
At the end of the day, there's a reason it's called social.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So
Imagine that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You want it to ladder up to your objectives, but you also want to be true to what the medium is.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's such a long lead time, right? I mean, we were talking about your objectives. I mean, sometimes this may be the roadmap or the road you're traveling for years, right? So how do you even stay focused and clear when that amount of time? Like, what does that look like? And how do you keep yourself honest?
That's a great question, because patience is probably not one of my biggest virtues, to be honest.
You want results now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, whether you're in a large organization or a smaller one, you as the marketing person will probably get tired of it long before your message is truly resonating and truly cemented in your customer's mindset. So if you've done that right upfront work and you feel like you've gotten it right, stay the course, be patient,
Yes.
and continue with the message. Your tactics under that may change, but stay the course.
Well, how do you stay the course? I mean, are you posting it on your walls? Is it written on, the entry of the office? Like, how do you get everyone aligned with that focus? Because that, again, back to the original video with the drumming, it's hard to get everybody drumming together.
It is. I think that's a great question. I think there's a number of different things you can do, but finding interesting ways to reinforce it, which can definitely be visual, and then finding ways to integrate it throughout your work every single day. One thing we did was through our what we call house habits, which are really core values, and we didn't go that traditional route of we act with integrity or we collaborate, which of course we do, but we think those are table stakes. So it's more things like open the house, which is about being transparent, dream big, move fast, always elevate, which those two kind of provide tension for each other, and what if, which is really challenging that legacy thinking. So it's things like that people are using every single day. So you'll say, sometimes we lean a little bit more into what if on a project, or lean a little bit into always elevating versus moving fast on something, or maybe we'll lean into moving fast on something else. But people are using it daily in emails and really engaging with that, which is starting to shift that culture, which ladders right back up to our objectives and our mission.
Yeah, starting the conversation with it, right? So that you are setting like what you were saying, like that's how it's your nomenclature internally, right? Is how you talk to each other.
Yeah, and I think if you get people using it on a daily basis, then it becomes part of who you are. And staying consistent with objectives, if you've set those right goals objectives that lead up to your North Star, then it's not sort of the flavor of the day,
Right.
which can be really easy to do because there's always shiny new things. So being consistent, not that you're not looking for new innovative things that do ladder up to your North Star, but if you have that consistency, then it's easier to make the right choices.
Yeah, and I think you have to think about, there's this sort of philosophy of you're leaving like these digital breadcrumbs wherever you go, right? And so that goes back, I think, to the consistency part of it. And where I see a lot of agents and brokers fail is that consistency, especially an individual agent, right? They've got this great plan, they're going to do this, they got back from Inman, they're all fired up,
Yes.
And then 2 weeks later, it's all gone to pieces,
It's
right?
overwhelming, right?
Yeah, it's overwhelming. And so that consistency, I on a smaller level, I talk a lot about it when it comes to content creation, video or Facebook Live, whatever content creation you're going to do, just pick a day and be consistent. It doesn't matter what the day is. It could be a Tuesday or Saturday. It doesn't matter. But the consistency, and most of the time, you probably see this too, is that most people don't stick with it. Right? It's like they don't see the results, And what's exciting is so often it's like pushing the snowball up the mountain. And there's a fascinating book that came out about a year or so ago called Known. It's written by Mark Schaefer. I don't know if you've read it before. But it's this whole idea of how long does it take to get known? Right? And it could be 12 to 18 months. It could be sooner, it could be later. But I think that ties into what we're talking about with objectives.
So how do you coach through that, though? I mean, that's tricky because there's a human nature element involved, right, of just wanting to throw in the towel. So is it just plattering it everywhere so that you just are seeing it, or is there a trick or a tool? Or I know you're like, will you stop with the tweetables already? I mean, come on,
Right. Well, I'm a big believer in the whole spray and pray, right? Which was sort of the marketing thing for a while, like take it and blast it everywhere. And I always get asked this question, isn't there like a button I can push, Katie, and it goes everywhere? And
you're like, no, don't ever press that button.
Don't press,
Whatever you do,
there is,
don't
but
press
I'm not
it.
telling you that button. Get rid of it.
Exactly.
Being smart, back to what you were saying, being smart about, the different platforms and how those all work together and sort of repurposing what you're doing. If you are doing for us, we do a weekly video every week, and that gets turned into an Instagram story and a Snapchat story and, micro content, snackable content.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably a good takeaway for a lot of you who are listening and creating content and thinking about your objectives. How can you repurpose that? How can you take one piece of content and slice and dice that into 20 different things? And especially if it's something evergreen. There's no reason why, you can't share something today and then again in 3 months and 6 months later.
That actually is a great tip.
It is, and to build on that, if you think about your consumer who you're trying to connect with, they're not getting tired of your message. So slicing and dicing it is a really good thing to be consistent, because if you're back to the spraying and praying that we're not doing, that's just going to confuse your consumer. So you want to think about your real objective is to make that connection with your consumer. So think about that and think about why you need to stay consistent. Yeah. I was chatting with Molly earlier, and I think Google's a really great example. You go into the Google homepage, and it's blank and clear.
And there's a reason. Marketing nerds, we really
there's a reason we all use Google.
Right.
Because how much money must they have been offered to put ads and different things on that homepage? And they've stayed consistent and not done it, which takes a lot of control to do that and a lot of focus. So I think if they can do it, we can do it.
And it's like what we were just talking about backstage. It's like when you figured out your objective, right? And maybe you don't know it, but you're just saying, okay, fine. I don't really know what we're going to move towards this, right? Sort of the fake it till you make it. And move towards that. It just makes it easier to say yes or to say no. Because at least you've got, okay, this is what we're striving toward,
Well, and it goes back to what Laura and I were talking about intention, right? And focus.
Yeah.
And we live in a sea of unfocus. And so bringing just that
sea
layer.
of shiny objects.
It really is. It really is. I didn't believe it until I really got in this industry, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a sea of shiny objects for real.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance between being focused and also not being afraid to try new things too. I think when you look at sort of the top producers that are getting a lot of business, especially from social media, a lot of the folks we work with that are getting 40 or 50% of their business from social media, one of the things they're not afraid to do is to try new things.
Yeah.
So they might try out Snapchat and see if it's a good fit, if their clients are on it, and if it's not, they dump it, right? They're not afraid to kind of be nimble and they understand that change happens. As soon as you sort of figure something out, it's going to change. And just being okay with that, kind of embracing that.
Yeah, I think failing is good, but fail fast and move on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're not failing at something, then you're probably not taking enough risk and pushing it hard enough.
Yeah.
So learn from your mistakes, move forward, and don't let that make you afraid to try something new again.
Yeah.
Well, then how do you know you're on track if you have a session of failures or, it's just like, how do you know you're on track?
Right.
What is, you're like, why do you always look at
Magic
me for the hard questions, right?
Cara?
I mean, how do you measure marketing? No, you don't.
Molly?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The
No.
$1 million question.
I know. I just setting you right up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, as we all know, marketing in general, it's hard. It's hard to measure. I remember saying this back in the day. It's like, how do you measure the success of a billboard? How do you measure the success of a newspaper ad? And obviously, there's a lot of things that you could do from a metric standpoint. And there are a lot of great free tools, like Facebook Insights and Google Analytics and some of the free tools that are available, Twitter Analytics. Now Instagram has analytics. And I think a lot of times we look at these analytics, but we don't really know what we're looking for or when we should do it. So I think one thing that can help is being consistent on when you are looking at that data and not trying to look at every single thing. But if you're trying to focus on, let's say, your website traffic, look at that metric and put it on your calendar. Okay, the 15th of every month, we're going to look at it, and then we'll start to track it for a year. And that's something that's measurable versus, okay, I'm just looking at a bunch of numbers, and I don't know. Is it working? Is it not working? And then I also think reaching out to your audience and getting feedback on their reaction, and what might be missing too.
That's amazing. And as a legacy brand, a big global corporation, how do you measure if you're on track or not?
I think playing off of what you said, looking at trends, and if you see a spike, understand that it's there, but look for the longer term trends and not let a short term incident sort of scare you away from something, but continue to monitor it. I think that's really important. And I would say it's probably half art and half science.
Yeah.
Because if you just look at numbers, today's world, it's digital, so we can analyze everything, which is true, but there's an art piece to it too. So I would say it's about a 50-50 split between numbers, incredibly important, because we do have a lot of tools and a lot of data available. But there's another side to that puzzle, which there is that gut element, which is harder to talk about. How do I do that, and how do I know if that's correct? But it's knowing your audience, knowing your customers, knowing what those pain points are, and understanding if you're delivering on those, because human nature is not just in numbers.
Right.
So I think it's really important to marry those two aspects.
So what if the conversation shift from return on investment to return on objectives? So instead of ROI, ROO. How would you feel about that?
Sure.
It's easier, right? Are you doing what you set out to do, right?
Absolutely.
Is it working? I mean, is your business growing? Are you, so too soft for you?
Well, no, I love the idea, and I think that you can move away from the return on the actual spend to looking at, are you hitting your higher level objectives?
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit harder in today's world to say this dollar did this exact action.
Exactly.
But you'll know if you're hitting those higher term objectives, such as market share, growth, or driving engagement, those types of things. And then you'll know if your whole collective group of actions is driving what you want it to do. From an agent standpoint, are you growing your sphere? Are you seeing more listings? Are those types of things occurring for you? And if not, then you might want to tweak what you're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, for a lot of agents and brokers looking outside their own market too, I think for me, that's one of the things that's really fun, is because I get to speak in different areas and see companies and people in different parts of the real estate world. And I think sometimes we get really micro-focused into what we're doing. So just, if you're an agent in San Francisco, well, what's someone doing in Boston? What are they doing in Toronto? Like, just kind of taking a step back to get that perspective and kind of inspiration,
Direct marketing attribution, maybe my single source of heartburn. You guys are probably the two most beautiful marketing minds in this industry. What do you want to impart on this track? Any last parting words of wisdom that you want to share?
I would say get comfortable with being uncomfortable
Yeah.
Yeah.
and learn how to say no.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound trite, but I would agree with you. You know, there's that philosophy of, again, like I said, leaning into who you are and who you're not, and not being all things to all people. It's a really easy thing to say. It's a great thing to have up on your wall. But then, you know, when the rubber meets the road, it's easy to say yes to things that aren't really the best thing for us. You know, we don't want to say no, right? So getting clear with your objectives and just, you know, understanding that it is okay to say no. A lot of times that no equals a yes. And I'll just
Or a
mention,
yes later.
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
later.
you can
Yeah.
park good ideas
Yes.
because they may make sense down the road. So don't lose them if
Yeah.
they come up, but
Yeah.
be okay kind of moving them to the side.
And we were sort of talking to sort of even like those ways of where you park ideas. We use Trello, right? And we actually have a parking lot of ideas that we were just not quite ready or they just don't fit in the bumpers today.
Yeah.
Do you,
We
you
use
have
Asana.
Asana? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Same thing. Yeah. How about you?
We're working on retooling pretty much everything we do right now.
Yes.
So more
you're
to
like
come on that.
Scratchpad.
Exactly.
Sticky notes right
That
now.
works
that.
No,
even better.
we're redoing all of our technology right now.
Yeah.
So underway.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, and also congratulations. Pretty
Thank you.
amazing.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.